How on earth does an insurgent socialist candidate become the mayor of New York City? It seems, well, pretty much impossible. But Zohran Mamdani's incredible rise to power wasn't a fluke. It was a plan, a meticulously crafted two-stage playbook. So let's break down exactly how he pulled it off.
So yeah, that's the big question, right? How does it actually happen? How does a self-described socialist, a complete outsider, manage to take the reins of America's largest city? It wasn't just luck. It wasn't just timing. The answer is a strategy that is way more deliberate than you might think.
The secret, really, lies in this two-part strategy. First, in 2020, the goal was to build and test a blueprint on a super small, hyper-local scale. Think of it like a laboratory. Then, stage 2, once you've perfected that model, you scale it up citywide in 2025. It's an incredibly methodical way to go about a political revolution.
Okay, so let's start with stage 1. We're going back to 2020 to a state assembly race in Astoria, Queens. This little local battle, this is where the entire playbook was created and tested.
So right away, Mamdani's campaign had a huge challenge. I mean, just look at this chart. When you compare him to the incumbent, Aravella Simotas, they agreed on almost everything. So if policy isn't the issue, what do you even run on? How do you convince voters to fire someone who says they're on their side?
Well, Mamdani's solution was to completely change the game. He shifted the fight away from policy and onto authenticity. He pledged to take absolutely zero corporate money. And that created this moral high ground for him to attack Simotas' record. The argument was simple, and it was brutal. We might say the same things, but my fundraising proves I actually mean it, and her corporate donors prove she doesn't.
But the campaign's real masterstroke came during the pandemic. They put this idea into practice, mutual aid as politics. See, they didn't just talk about helping people, they actually did it. They raised $65,000, turned their campaign office into the Astoria food pantry, and handed out thousands of meals. Think about that. At the height of a crisis, it was the insurgents' campaign, not the incumbent's office, that was delivering for the community.
And this single number, this shows you just how vital all of that on-the-ground work really was. 424. That's it. That was the final margin of victory in that 2020 primary. Just 424 votes. It proves that every single piece of their strategy, the food pantry, the outreach, it wasn't just some nice little extra. It was the victory. The blueprint worked.
So, the blueprint works in one neighborhood. But how do you take that success and translate it to a massive mayoral race? The next stage was all about scaling up, from one district in Queens to all 5 boroughs. And this is where the strategy gets really, really smart.
To unite a city of 8.5 million people, especially after a pandemic, they knew they needed one powerful, universal theme. And they found it in a single word: affordability. This became the laser focus of the entire campaign. It was a simple, direct answer to the overwhelming economic anxiety everyone was feeling.
And the message discipline was just incredible. As one critic put it, he used the word with talismanic regularity. It was like a magic charm. Every speech, every interview, every single debate, it all came back to affordability. He completely defined the election on his own terms.
This is where you can really see the rebranding for a mass audience in action. It's basically a translation guide. The complex socialist ideology from 2020, with words like decommodify, gets transformed into simple, powerful promises like freeze the rent. Decarcerate becomes the Department of Community Safety. They didn't actually change their goals, they just learned to speak a new, much more popular language.
This populist messaging powered him to a huge upset in the Democratic primary against former Governor Andrew Cuomo. And a key factor here was ranked choice voting. You know, where you rank candidates in order of preference. Well, when the other major progressive candidate was eliminated, most of their supporters' second-choice votes flowed right to Mamdani. It consolidated the entire progressive wing behind him and pushed him right over the top.
So that primary win set up this chaotic three-way general election. Now let's break down the final phase of the playbook and see exactly how it delivered the mayor's office.
Here are the final numbers. Mamdani wins with just over 50% of the vote, but look closely at his opposition. Andrew Cuomo, running as an independent, and Curtis Sliwa, the Republican. Together, they took almost 49% of the vote. Having the opposition fractured like that was a huge strategic advantage for Mamdani's unified base.
This chart really spells out the competing visions, doesn't it? Mamdani offered direct redistribution, freeze rents, tax millionaires. Super simple. Cuomo offered these complex managerial plans about job creation, and Sliwa was all about order.
In a city getting squeezed by the cost of living, Mamdani's simple, direct promise to put money back in people's pockets, well, that was just the most powerful message.
But, a message is nothing without a machine to deliver it. And while his opponents were relying on TV ads, Mamdani scaled up that 2020 ground game and took it citywide. This huge volunteer army powered by the Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, they simply out-organized and outworked everybody else on the streets. It wasn't even close.
So, why did this playbook ultimately win? When you boil it all down, it comes to three key things: a superior strategy, a massive miscalculation by his opponent, and a political context that played right into his hands.
This comparison right here says it all. Mamdani ran a modern grassroots campaign built for this exact moment. Cuomo, his main rival, ran this totally out-of-touch 2010-style establishment campaign. He was not in the streets, basically just giving up the entire grassroots field to Mamdani. He was fighting the last war, and he got crushed.
And then there was the shadow opponent. When President Trump started constantly attacking Mamdani, calling him a communist, it was a massive political gift in a place like New York City. The attacks elevated Mamdani from just a local politician to a national progressive leader. It rallied the city's huge anti-Trump vote right to his side, and he just sealed that narrative perfectly in its victory speech.
So in the end, it was really a perfect storm. Mamdani combined a brilliant grassroots strategy with a message that was perfectly tuned to the moment. Then he got a huge boost from a fractured opposition, an out-of-touch main opponent, and a national rival who basically rallied voters to his cause by mistake.
Which leaves us with one last really big question. Mamdani's victory wasn't an accident. It was a plan to build local power, translate radical ideas into popular policies, and just flat-out out-organize the establishment. So, is this something that can be replicated? Is this the new blueprint for political change in cities all across the country?